Welcome to Workplace Wake Up, your go-to podcast for practical employment law guidance. I'm Jennifer Shaw, the founder of Shaw Law Group, and I'm here to help HR professionals and leaders navigate the legal minefields of the modern workplace. Each week, we tackle real-world issues with clear advice and a little tough love. Let's get started. We are now in the month of November, which I can't even believe, to be honest with you. This year is almost over. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some leadership principles. I've said several times on this podcast that leaders aren't born leaders most of the time. We have to learn how to do it. And some of us have a little more challenges in that area than others. I certainly have a hard time balancing schedules and making sure that I'm not complicating other people's lives by what I'm doing with my schedule and with my emails and my calendar and all of that. But one of the things that I've really been noticing is that as a leader, most of us want to be kind, but the truth is sometimes being, quote, nice gets in the way of doing what's right. It can create confusion, resentment, and risk. So today, I want to talk to you about how to stay kind and effective without letting comfort replace accountability. Okay, so I want you to think about this idea of what does it mean to be a good leader and how do we do that? Now, one of the downsides of wanting to be, quote, nice is that we often avoid giving feedback, right? And this is sort of the time of year when many of us do annual performance reviews. And one of the hidden costs of being nice, from my perspective, is that sometimes you end up giving no feedback. You don't create any documentation. You sort of close your eyes and plug your ears and hope the problem is going to go away. So let's say, for example, a supervisor is trying to deal with attendance issues with an employee, but they don't want to be unfair. They don't want to have to be nitpicky. They don't want the employee to think they're micromanaging. So they let a lot of attendance issues go by without saying anything. And then all of a sudden the supervisor gets furious and figures out, oh my gosh, there's a problem here. I've got to sit down and talk about attendance. But for the employee, it's the first time they've ever heard it. So the employee feels like, wait a minute, you're so upset. You're so frustrated. You have all this pent up anger, it sounds like, but you've never even talked to me about this. So it might be that you're just coming after me because I'm a woman, because of my skin color, because of my sexual orientation, whatever it is. It can lead to discrimination claims and harassment claims. The truth is, avoidance doesn't protect anyone, okay? It just delays the hard part of the employment relationship. It just delays, and of course, it's not just employment relationship. It delays what we have in our personal relationships where we want them to be as good as they can be. But sometimes to get to that point, we have to deliver a hard message. So I want you to think a little bit about the difference between compassion and compliance, and not really the difference so much as how you weigh them, right? How you weigh compassion and compliance. Because I think a lot of times leaders think, well, if I'm going to be empathetic, I have to give it an exception, right? I shouldn't be holding people accountable to the same level. If I'm going to be empathetic about what somebody's going through, then I'm going to need to grant exceptions. I'm going to need to not apply my policy. So, for example, a manager says, well, Jen, her work hasn't been great lately, but she's going through a lot of things. And I'm just going to kind of let her be for a bit because I don't want to add to her drama. Well, that's okay. But now it looks like the supervisor's engaging in favoritism, right? Because he's not holding me accountable because I'm, quote, going through something, but yet other people are going to be held accountable. And I think when we talk about how to deal with these issues, we really need to focus on prioritizing fairness over favoritism. Kindness is really about giving people clarity, right? It's not about giving them special treatment. So when I say being kind can cause a problem and can complicate leadership, I put kind in quotation marks because it all depends on how you define kind, right? If you mean by kindness that you're giving clarity, you're holding people accountable in a gentle way, that's one thing. But if you're giving them exceptions or you're giving them passes, that's going to create more work for you down the line. Now, under the law, of course, We have all sorts of rules about consistency and about fairness, whether we're talking about the Fair Employment and Housing Act here in California, or Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, or the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, which is another federal law, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And of course, your policy, your organization's policies set standards. So when you're looking at inconsistency and you're saying, okay, we're not treating everybody fairly, that doesn't necessarily mean we're treating everyone the same, right? What it means is we look at our standards and we act in a way that is consistent with those standards. So when we talk about empathy and we talk about compassion, real compassion means applying the rules with humanity, right? It doesn't mean rewriting those rules. It doesn't mean looking at those rules from a different perspective and not holding people accountable. It just means that we think about it from a little bit of a different perspective, right? We're actually thinking of it from the perspective of, okay, how am I going to drive this good behavior? How am I going to get this individual to do what I need them to be doing? So when you're looking at NICE and when you're considering leadership principles, I want you to think about, what does it really take to be an effective leader? So I had a talk with our firm administrator this morning because my calendar changes a lot. And it's my fault. It's totally my fault. Somebody will ask for something that they need me to do, and then I already have something booked. And so I try to squeeze them in, or I try to figure out something, or somebody needs to change something, or somebody has an emergency, or I have an emergency with my mom or with Ella. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of change with the calendar. And I think Ronnie's fed up with that, and I don't blame her. And we just hired a new employee, and she said, listen, we've got to figure out how to get this done correctly. And she's right. And I think when she's been telling me about this problem before, she's been pretty nice about it. And today she said, you have to prioritize firm management. And I was like, oh boy, okay, Ronnie's upset. And Ronnie doesn't get upset very often. But getting her in that frame of mind really helped me understand this is a big deal. Like, not only does changing the schedule torture me and ruin my day and get me all verklempt, it really has a negative impact on everybody else in the firm and everybody who's trying to get my schedule together, right? So in this case, Ronnie was really clear. You have to find a way, when you book something, it stays on your calendar. You cannot move it. And she's right, and I get it. And that's what I'm going to strive for. I needed to hear it, I guess, pretty directly for me to understand exactly what she's been saying. She's been mentioning this. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not blaming this on Ronnie. I should have figured this out, right? But the reality is I needed to think about the bigger picture of, okay, how is this conduct affecting others? And it just didn't dawn on me until she laid it out really firmly and really clearly. I just didn't get it. So that focus on trying to be nice or trying to please people or trying to be empathetic should never override delivering a clear message about what needs to be done. And I'm learning that sometimes being nice actually does more harm than good, right? If we avoid having these hard conversations and we overlook performance issues, and let's be honest, that scheduling problem is a performance issue on my part, we derail accountability, morale, and sometimes even compliance. So what I want us to think about is when we're talking about being an effective leader and we're talking about how to demonstrate leadership, we need to lead with heart and backbone. No question about it, right? We've got to be empathetic. We've got to be kind, but we also have to be clear. There's a phrase I love that I think can come into play here. Kind candor, okay? So direct, respectful feedback that is focused on growth, okay? This idea of this is what we need you to do, and this is how we need you to do it. And it's not flexible. It's not voluntary. It's not something that you can choose to do or you can't. This is what we need from you, and this is how it needs to be done. So one of the things I want you to think about is starting with care and with clarity, right? So you're doing it in a kind way, but you're being very clear about what you need. When you prepare documentation, you don't document your feelings. I am frustrated. I am angry. Jen is unorganized. Jen is lazy, whatever the phrase is, right? Instead, we document the facts. Jennifer frequently changes her schedule, which creates chaos in the office. Okay, that's a fact, right? Maybe it's not chaos, but creates confusion and frustration. I know that's for sure. The old adage, praise in public and correct in private, is still true. The way you show kindness at work is you don't put somebody on the spot. You don't humiliate them. I had a boss one time who said, when I yell at you, it's because I want to toughen you up. And I want you to understand that you're strong and you can do this. So that's why I yell at you. And one day I said to him, well, you know what it's really doing? It's making me want to quit. It isn't making me stronger. It's not making me grow. It's not doing anything positive. It makes me want to quit. So praising in public and correcting in private is very important. And let's be clear, you guys, we can be both kind and courageous, right? It's not an either or. It's not like, oh, well, we have to be nice or we have to be committed to excellence and have courage and be strong and show clarity. Both things can happen at once. And I think too frequently in our culture, we pick the two ends of a spectrum and we say it has to be this way or that way. And we don't really take a step back and think about, well, wait, is there something in the middle? Is there something we can do in the middle that will help make this a little bit better? So first thing I want you to think about, nice is comfortable, but actually clear is kind. That clarity is really what I want you to focus on. Are you sure you're communicating exactly what you need? I also want you to think about this idea. If you're hesitating to say something important, ask yourself, who am I really protecting, right? Who am I really trying to shield from this information? Is it the person who I should be giving the feedback to? Is it me because I don't want to have a tough conversation? Think about that. Who are you really protecting? That is going to make a huge difference when you are managing teams and when you are demonstrating leadership, because the bottom line is when you do that, you are so much more likely to have a clear, constructive conversation that actually changes behavior or encourages the same behavior you're getting, right? I really like what you're doing now, and I want you to continue doing that. That is something that you really have to focus on. For most of us, it is not an obvious thing. We don't know how to do that in a way that is just natural. We have to be thinking through, what is the message I'm trying to communicate? How am I going to do it in a clear way? And how am I going to make sure that the person understands what I'm asking for? So how do we know that we reach some kind of consensus about what needs to be done? Okay? So when you're looking at this idea of how kindness can complicate leadership, think about your definition of kind. If your definition of kind is clear, unambiguous, direct, then that is fantastic. If your definition of kind is beating around the bush, trying not to upset somebody, not wanting to give constructive criticism all at once, so you spread it out over 3 weeks, that is not kind. That is ineffective. It's a waste of time, and it creates a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration, and I think also resentment on the part of people. So go out there, you guys, think about kindness in the right way from a leadership perspective. That's what we do when we are trying to make a difference in the workplace. We think about, okay, how do I be a more effective leader? How do I get my message across more clearly? How do I be sure that everybody understands what to expect from me? When you do that, you are bringing kindness to the workplace. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today, and go out and do something nice for someone. I'll see you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Workplace Wake Up. If you found today's discussion helpful, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with your HR and leadership teams. For more insights, training programs, and legal updates, you can visit us at shawlawgroup.com.